It's the evening of May 28, 1940. London is dim under the blackout. Radios whisper only bad news. In France, the British army is trapped against the sea, fighting for its life in Dunkirk. The German advance has been so fast and so brutal that entire governments are falling apart in its wake. Inside the cabinet room at number 10, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and something heavier: fear. Winston Churchill has been Prime Minister for less than 3 weeks. Already his government is on the brink of collapse. His own Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, is pressing for negotiations with Hitler. And if Halifax wins this argument, Churchill will almost certainly be forced out, and Britain could abandon the war altogether. This is the story of the night Churchill nearly lost power, and the night Britain nearly lost the Second World War, before a single shot was fired on its own shores. To understand how fragile Churchill's position was, you have to see the world as it looked in May 1940. Just 18 days earlier, on the 10th of May, Hitler launched his invasion of Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The German blitzkrieg sliced through the Ardennes, an attack the Allies believed impossible, and within days the front had collapsed. Entire British and French divisions were being encircled. Communication lines were failing. Panic spread through every government in Europe. That same day, Neville Chamberlain resigned as Prime Minister. After months of political strain, culminating in the disastrous Norway campaign, he no longer commanded the confidence of Parliament. Churchill replaced him, but only by a narrow political margin. Many Conservatives still preferred Lord Halifax. Churchill entered office with enormous pressure, little trust, and a war spiraling out of control. By late May, the situation bordered on hopeless. France was breaking, Belgium was collapsing. The British Expeditionary Force was being driven steadily toward the coast, with no guarantee anyone could be rescued. In London, ministers were working around the clock. Every meeting brought darker news. And in this atmosphere of fear, one question began to dominate the war cabinet. Should Britain fight on or attempt to negotiate with Hitler while it still could? The crisis that nearly brought Churchill down began quietly, almost cautiously, inside the War Cabinet, May 24 to 26, 1940. As the situation in France deteriorated, Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax became increasingly convinced that Britain could not win. His reasoning, from a strategic standpoint, wasn't insane. France looked doomed. The Low Countries were gone. The British Army, nearly 300,000 men, was trapped at Dunkirk with no certainty it could escape. If the BEF was lost, Britain would be defenseless. Halifax argued that the government had a duty to at least explore possible terms before Britain was completely crushed. The suggestion was not surrender, but mediation. Italy, still neutral at this moment, could approach Hitler on Britain's behalf. Perhaps Britain could keep its independence, its fleet, maybe even parts of the empire, if it acted before disaster became total. Churchill was horrified. He believed that even opening the door to negotiation would signal weakness. Once talks began, Britain might never be able to walk away. And worse, the very knowledge that the War Cabinet was considering negotiations could break the country's morale. But Churchill had a problem. Halifax wasn't a fringe voice. He was respected, articulate, and, critically, the preferred choice for Prime Minister among many Conservatives. Several of them believed Churchill was too reckless, too emotional, and too unpredictable for such a moment. If Halifax resigned over this, the Conservative Party could shift against Churchill. His premiership, barely 3 weeks old, could collapse overnight. By the evening of May 26, the War Cabinet was dangerously split, and Churchill sensed something even more threatening. He was starting to lose. By May 26, the War Cabinet was locked in a grinding, hour-by-hour struggle over Britain's future. Churchill, Halifax, Chamberlain, Attlee, and Greenwood met repeatedly, sometimes 3 or 4 times in a single day, as new reports arrived from France. Each one was worse than the last. General Ismay briefed them. The Germans had taken the Channel ports, Calais was falling, the French front was disintegrating, and Dunkirk, where the British army now clung to a shrinking perimeter, might hold for only a short time. If the evacuation failed, Britain could lose nearly every trained soldier it had. Halifax pressed harder. He insisted Britain should not rule out mediation. Italy was still neutral. Mussolini might broker terms that preserved Britain's independence. Halifax believed it would be irresponsible not to test that route before the situation became hopeless. Churchill countered with fury and fear. He warned that any hint of negotiation could destroy the nation's spirit. He believed Hitler could not be trusted, that any terms would be a trap leading to British disarmament and subjugation. But inside the small war cabinet room, Churchill found himself increasingly isolated. For 2 days, the argument churned without resolution. On the evening of May 27th, Halifax delivered what felt like a near final blow. He told the room that refusing even to explore terms was a gamble of the most desperate kind. Churchill had no mathematical rebuttal because Halifax was right about the military situation. All Churchill had was conviction. As midnight approached, Halifax seemed to have the advantage. Chamberlain leaned toward him. Churchill's Labour allies supported him, but Labour alone could not keep a government alive. If Halifax pushed this to a break, Churchill's premiership might not survive the night. Churchill needed a dramatic move, something to break the stalemate, and he had one left. On the afternoon of May 28, 1940, with the War Cabinet deadlocked and his own position wobbling, Churchill made a bold, risky move. He bypassed the five-man War Cabinet entirely. At 6:15 p.m., he convened the Outer Cabinet, more than 24 senior ministers who had not been privy to the Halifax-Churchill showdown. These men represented the broader government. Their support would send a message Halifax couldn't ignore. Churchill entered the room pale, exhausted, and angry. Then he delivered one of the most important speeches of his life, not in Parliament, but in a cramped meeting room inside Downing Street. He told them the situation was grave. The British Army might be lost. The enemy might invade. Yet, he said, we must show them that we are still masters of our fate. Ministers recorded that the speech electrified the room. Everyone understood what this meeting was really about: Halifax's push for negotiations and Churchill's attempt to kill it. One by one, the ministers spoke, not cautiously, not diplomatically, unanimously. They declared that Britain must fight on. No negotiations, no mediation, no peace feelers. A stand. Some ministers even approached Churchill afterward, patting his shoulder, telling him they were with him to the end. The message was unmistakable. The broader government backed Churchill, not Halifax. And then came the moment that truly sealed it. Neville Chamberlain, the man Churchill had replaced just weeks earlier, and still the leader of the Conservative Party, signaled his support for Churchill's position. Halifax, seeing the tide turn and knowing he would not bring the party with him, backed down. In a single meeting, the political threat evaporated. Churchill survived, and Britain's fate turned. Without this moment, the war might have taken a very different path. When the Outer Cabinet meeting broke up on the evening of May 28th, Churchill had won, but only barely. The fight inside government was over, yet the fight outside it was just beginning. That same night, Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk, was underway. Destroyers, merchant ships, and civilian boats of every shape and size were racing across the channel under fire to rescue the trapped British Army. Every hour mattered. Every mile gained meant more men saved. Churchill understood that his political victory would mean nothing if the BEF was wiped out. The country needed a miracle, and the government needed proof that its decision to fight on hadn't been madness. Over the next several days, the miracle arrived. Tens of thousands of soldiers were lifted off the beaches, then hundreds of thousands. Britain's army, shaken, bloodied, but alive, returned home. Newspapers called it deliverance. Ordinary people felt a surge of confidence that had been absent for weeks. Inside Downing Street, Churchill's position strengthened. Halifax had been neutralized, at least for the moment. Chamberlain remained a stabilizing force, and the coalition government stood united. But Churchill knew the truth. Britain was still in mortal danger. The political crisis had been survived, but the darkest months of the war still lay ahead. In the days that followed, the pressure on Winston Churchill never truly lifted. The public saw his speeches, the confidence, the defiance, the thunder in his voice. But behind closed doors, he carried a weight almost impossible to imagine. He slept little, he paced constantly. His aides later wrote that he would wander the corridors of Downing Street in the middle of the night, cigar in hand, mumbling through possibilities and worst-case scenarios. He felt the presence of history pushing down on him, demanding clarity at the very moment when nearly every military forecast pointed to disaster. Yet there was something in Churchill that refused to bend. His temperament, emotional, impulsive, sometimes reckless, became a strength in moments when cautious men lost their nerve. Halifax feared catastrophe. Churchill feared submission even more. It was not just strategy, it was conviction. And it was this conviction that kept him standing while the ground shook beneath everyone else. The drama inside the cabinet room on May 28, 1940 was not a footnote. It was a turning point, a moment when the fate of a nation, and arguably the fate of the entire war, balanced on the convictions of a handful of men behind a closed door. Had Halifax prevailed, Britain would likely have opened negotiations with Hitler. Even if those talks began cautiously, the psychological shift would have been seismic. Morale would have crumbled. The French might have fought less fiercely. Roosevelt's confidence in Britain's resolve could have evaporated, and a Britain seeking terms would never have become the fortress that later anchored the Allied return to Europe. Instead, Britain chose the harder road. Alone, poorly armed, facing an enemy that had crushed every opponent in its path, it decided to fight on. That decision did not guarantee victory, but it made victory possible. The night Churchill almost fell from power was the night Britain refused to surrender, not because it was strong, but because it chose to be. And history would remember that choice.